Hi, this is Frances O'Rourke Dow with the Quilt Alliance StoryBee, and today we are talking with Victoria Findlay Wolfe. And here's Victoria now in her studio in New York City. Hi, Victoria.
Hey.
Hey. I'm hoping we can start off with a tour of your studio. Can you walk us around and show us some things?
Well, I can do a little spin. I wouldn't say there's all that much room to do a walking tour, but you'll get a pretty good view of what happens in the space. So we are in my New York City studio. This is a space where I create everything, but is not open to the public. I have a store also in the same building, which is open to the public. But this is where I'm doing my daily work. And you've caught me at a time when I'm working on probably 15 to 20 projects all at the same time. January is a time when I'm not traveling so much, so I'm home. And when I'm home and not traveling, I got to be sewing my little brains out. So that's exactly what I've been doing this week.
And how much time every day do you spend in your studio?
Oh, I'm here all day long.
Are you? You
and then
play
I go
music?
home, and then my daughter's doing homework, and then I'll be doing binding. So I put in a lot of hours every day, every week, and it's definitely a 7-day-a-week job.
And when you're in your studio, are you listening to music, watching Netflix, or is it just you and the fabric?
Sometimes it's a podcast, depending on if my staff is here as well. There'll be music playing, or if the long arm is going, then it's kind of hard to hear anything. So it depends on the day and the mood. Generally, if I'm in here by myself, it might be a podcast or it might be quiet. But if my staff and stuff are in here, we're usually having a really good time. And our little secret is there'll be country music playing.
Ooh.
I know. Who thought a girl in New York City is listening to country music?
But you're originally from the farm, right?
I am. Yeah, you can only take the girl off the farm so far. So the country music came with me from Minnesota.
Oh, that's great. Well, what I actually want to start off with is talking to you about once you moved off the farm and into the city. And by that, I think I mean the city of Minneapolis. You went to art school. You started out as an artist. And I would love if you could talk about that. What kind of art were you making? What artists inspired or influenced you? And what was the career that you envisioned at that time for yourself?
Okay, well, I always knew I was going to be an artist, so that part of my life has never changed. I'm definitely a maker, so as a young child, it was from crayons to paint to playing with wood or playing with fabric scraps to whatever creative thing I could get my hands on. And I still think that hasn't changed, just that my medium in college was in oil paint and painting and drawing and photography. And now I feel like I'm doing the same thing, but I'm doing it with fabric on the wall. I moved to New York to be an artist. That's the reason I came here. And I had a painting studio for a while until I had sort of a tragedy in my creative life. The building flooded and my studio was in the basement and I lost all of my work. So I stopped painting for about 2 years at that time and kind of just went strictly into photography at that time. And then started sewing again because my daughter was about to come into my life. So I started making her bedding for her nursery, and then I started making clothing, and then that became a small children's clothing company. And then that was kind of boring and decided it was more fun to just make the quilts that I was making. And that's kind of how that all evolved. And you'll notice on this quilt behind me that I have about 5, 6, 7 quilts that are up on my design wall right now, because I am doing all of my designing on the design wall, and very much like if I'd been painting and pushing paint around on a canvas.
Right. So you're not an EQ kind of gal sitting on a computer. You are on the wall.
I am on the wall. I don't know where my quilts are going to go. They start out cutting a large scrap pile. In fact, we have a scrap pile sitting right here on the table beside me. I'm cutting way more fabric out than I need, and then I'll push things around on the design wall until I get it to the way that I want it. And then I will start sewing things together at that time. For me, it's the journey of discovery of what a quilt is going to be and what options can happen and what accidents can happen and how the story can change. I don't like knowing. You couldn't just hand me a picture and say, can you make this? Because I'll just be bored stiff and I won't make it. It's this of
even if I gave you a picture and you said, I'll try to make it, would that be impossible for you to do? You would end up going off in a different direction.
Oh, I would totally.
Yeah.
It's boring. It doesn't hold my interest at all. I want to be able to see what else I can do to it to make it a unique and interesting journey. And a fun journey. It should be joyful and fun, because if it's not, then I don't know what I'm doing here. I should be doing something else.
Right. Right. Now, who were some of the artists who you loved? Like when you were younger or now even?
There's a lot of different people that I'm really drawn to. Matisse is one of my favorites. There's a lot of photographers and things that I'm interested in. I sort of really change constantly. I'm more interested in artists and learning about their process. So like looking at Picasso and Matisse and all the artists from that generation, how they were sort of communicating with each other or sharing props and textures and things. So when you look at their works, you're seeing lots of different interesting tie-ins in their work, which I think is really cool. So just kind of looking more like that at artists and things.
Right. So you're very much, it sounds like very much a process person.
All process.
All process, which I'm a quilt maker as well as a writer, and it's all process. And I'm the same way. If I know where something is going, I stop.
Right.
And by the way, all of you are
to put my personality into it, and I can only do that if I can explore it a little bit and see, now what else could I do with this shape and turn it into something else.
Well, one of the questions, and I was going to say, if you hear a dog barking, that is my dog Travis, who has been silent all day until he heard Victoria and then wanted to know what was going on. So yes. I would love to talk, I was going to ask you about a specific quilt that a lot of people know, which is Double Edged Love, which strikes me, interestingly, as a very painterly quilt. I look at it and there are other artists that not that I would make a direct tie to, but I'm like, oh, that strikes me. I mean, there's to me a Rauschenberg and kind of collage element to it, but I'm curious can you talk about the genesis of that quilt? I'm assuming it started on the wall.
Actually, it started out as a completely different quilt. So it was a random quilt top that I had made that I just had no emotional connection to it. And one day I was looking around my studio and thought, well, it's kind of an ugly quilt top, so what can I do with it? I had just gotten a die cut of a double wedding ring. And anytime I'm making a quilt, I'm always looking to see, is there something new or different that I hadn't done before? So I thought, hey, double wedding ring, what can I do with that? So I took that quilt top and I ran it through the die cut and I cut out all of the shapes. Again, I'm about process. So it's always, let's just cut it and see what I have. I consider that there is no mistake. It's always, what do I have and how can I make it work for me? So I cut out all of those shapes. I started putting those shapes on the wall and I cut it out the opposite that you normally do a double wedding ring. Normally in the double wedding ring, you're going to find the color in the arcs. This time I was cutting it out on the small melons and the concave square. So it gave a completely different vision to what that quilt could look like with the batting coming through where the color would normally be. So once I did that, I had this moment of all the little hairs stand up on my arms because I'm making an emotional connection to it. That's when that happens, that a little charge that you get. And I put it on the wall and I was like, well, that's really kind of cool. It was a different way to look at it. And I was thinking a lot at that time about where I came from in Minnesota and where I live now in New York City. That was also a time when the Modern Quilt Guild was sort of starting out, and there was a lot of conversation about what is modern and what is tradition and why does there have to be something different. And sometimes those conversations got a little heated, and sometimes it's like oil and water. And so I was kind of seeing how that was kind of happening on my design wall with my fabric pieces. And I thought that it tied in really nicely. Full circle moment about, again, thinking about where I came from and where I am now, thinking about my grandmother's quilts and what I do, and trying to let the quilt tell that story to give a visual to the thought process that was going on in my head. And as I was making that quilt, though, I was getting a lot of other ideas because of the way some of the fabric had cut up in ways that I hadn't expected. Some of it looks like the fields, the farm fields where I grew up. Some of them look like streets here in New York City. So I was making a lot of real emotional connections in that process. So I started to think about, well, what else could I do? And I started thinking about, well, what if my grandmother and I had made a quilt together? Can I tell a story about where I live now? Can I, think about all the other elements of things that my grandmother did as far as embroidery and crochet and all of these elements? And can I incorporate that into a quilt? And so it became sort of a personal healing journey for me. And I ended up making 13 double wedding ring quilts at that time, which then were exhibited. The book was an afterthought, totally came later. The quilts were not made to be in a book. They were made just as I had to make those. And I think that really sums up why I do what I do. I do it because I have to do it. I would feel there's a very big part of me missing if I wasn't making something. And not saying that meaning that it has to be quilts that I'm making, but I just need to make. It's just part of who I am and my nature.
Right. Ever get to a point you start a quilt and it sounds like that emotional connection is really important to you, that's another debate is what is quilting? Is it an art? Is it a craft? And I think that oftentimes, for me, in some ways, it's not that important of a debate, but it's when the feeling comes into the quilt that for me, it becomes art, even if it's a very traditional quilt. Do you have to have that emotional connection? Do you ever work on quilts and not make that connection and go, I can't put any more into this quilt, I'm done?
I prefer to make quilts that have an emotional connection. I do make quilts that can be more commercial for specific reasons for something, but generally if I'm making it for either a customer's quilt, this is a commission quilt that will be a one of a kind, that kind of work, there has to be an emotional connection or there's no reason for it. I consider them art. I think all quilters are artists. We're all cutting something up and then we're building something and we're making something. And I also find that if people can embrace that, I think that helps give quilts the recognition that they need, that it is art. I mean, we are now seeing more quilts on walls as far as being art. That's right. Labeled that way. But I think the quilter itself has to embrace that they're artists, that they're making choices and they're making something. I think that's important to the story. And I think that will also help the rest of the community who's not in the quilt world to sort of respect quilts a little bit more. So I think it has to start with us to really embrace that it's an art. It is an art. It's no different than crafting a car or painting a picture, or you're making choices on color and how you're constructing things, and the word craft can just slide away.
Well, I find a lot of quilters resist that notion. They're not I feel like it's almost, they feel it's bragging, or it's the art is something.
I don't know if it's bragging. I think it's probably more self-doubt. People feel that they can't live up to that, and that's why I try to reinforce when I'm teaching in a class to give people that comfort that you're doing something that's important to you personally. So embracing that and taking that, not that you have to go broadcast it to the world, say, hey, I'm an artist, but I think it's something to reflect on while you're thinking about the process in which you're making something. And I think that makes a big difference to the final outcome about the way that we respect what we do. Like my grandma used to make a quilt and she'd be like, oh, that old thing. I'm like, yeah, it's still special. Like, you got to take the credit for that. You've made those decisions. You've made something beautiful. You're giving something to somebody who's going to love it. Or they're not quilt worthy.
They better love it. Yeah, no, and also you have invested your time and yourself into it, and often a story, whether it's the story of what's going on in your life around the making of the quilt or the story of why you're making the quilt. And again, that to me feeds into the notion of a quilt as an art object, because it has meaning and emotion attached to it. So I would love for more quilters to embrace themselves as artists and to take the work that they're doing seriously. I'm glad that's something that's coming up in your teaching, and that's actually another thing I want to ask you about, because you are a very popular teacher. I've talked to lots of people who've taken your classes. They love you. They get so much out of them. And I know that that's something that you do to make a living, but what else what do you get out of teaching besides that, besides, making a living?
It's a lot about what I was talking about. And when I talk about the self-doubt, trying to get people, a lot of people are just making quilts and not doing it as a business like I am. I'm not only doing things as a business, I'm doing it because I need to do it, but they're doing it as a hobby. So, I'm trying to get them to be comfortable in that zone and to enjoy their hobby. Because like I said at the beginning, like if you're not having fun, then you need to find something else to do. Right? There's other things you could be doing. So to lighten up and not worry about making mistakes, it's only fabric, you have more, you can cut it up, you can change it, you can buy more fabric, right? So to not feel that it's so precious that you can't just try something out of your comfort zone. And the more that you do that, the more you can embrace it and enjoy the process, and make yourself feel worthy in the process of that, and letting go of the self-doubt. Again, it's a hobby for most people. You should be able to enjoy that hobby. That's the thing I like to do, get people to get comfortable with. And also, I'm always teaching them some skill which might be something that people don't like Y seams or curve seams. And I show them that they're really not that hard. You just need a few minutes to learn it. And once they do that, making them feel comfortable in their skin, to enjoy the process, and then tackle something that they thought was going to be difficult. There's nothing better than that. There's nothing better than that. That's just a really cool thing when the little light bulbs go off and they get excited about something that they love doing. Right.
And helps them, I don't want to use the word advance, but the more skills you add, the more you can do. And that's what's really exciting.
It's the more that you can do, but it's also, once you have that many skills, the more you can break those skills and do something different. Break the rules. Once you know the rules, you can break the rules.
That's right. You can't break the rules unless you know how to play the game. Yeah. So talk about, I don't know, I see in your studio and listening to you talk, I have the sense of a person who is pretty regularly creatively inspired. But say you're going through a slump, or say you're looking for inspiration. You're ready to make something, but you want something from that. You want to go look at something or listen to something or see something that's going to really prime your pump. What do you do?
Well, first of all, never consider myself in a slump. I work on many different projects at one time. So if something's not working here, I work on something else. Sometimes I'll be working on something on this other project, which will make a connection to some other project on my walls. So I think number one, as far as changing the way that you think about your creative process, thinking about being stuck. I think if you focus on that, you're going to be stuck. I think looking around you, there's always inspiration everywhere. I never know where I'm going to get inspiration. I just fiddle with color and pushing things around my wall with leftover pieces. I cut my parts department. I have all these things. Sometimes I'll just shove them up on my design wall with no pattern whatsoever, but just leave them there. And looking at them, that's one of the biggest things I think where people consider if they're getting stuck on something, is that they get so hung up on what the issue that they're having is, that they can't see actually what's in front of them anymore. So a lot of the other stuff that I'm doing in my classes, besides teaching techniques, is getting people to be comfortable looking. We all want the information. We're trained to buy the pattern, buy the fabrics in the pattern, and make the quilt as we see it in the pattern. But then all of a sudden we finish a quilt top and we're like, oh my God, the whole row is in there the wrong way. Because we're looking at it so much that, our brain is just filling in the ideas, but we're not actually seeing it anymore. So getting people to step back and look at something in a different way is a great way to get out of something like that. So taking photos is a great thing to do. Turning photos upside down and looking at them in a different view, and and anything that can change the way that you normally work and look is going to give you new eyes and new inspiration to working out whatever issue you think you're having in there. Taking it out of its context is a really good exercise to have.
How important, or let's put it this way, what role does community play in your quilt making and your life as a quilter?
Well, I think that's part of the reason I'm in the industry, is for the community. I think finding my people was walking into my first guild meeting and being super nervous I would never thought that I would stand up in front of a group of people and talk. The hardest thing I ever did was stand up in front of my guild at show and tell and show a quilt. But something really magical happens when you do that. You know, I travel around a lot and I hear people that they'll go to a guild and they'll say, oh, well, I went to that guild and nobody talked to me. And I'm like, but did you go and show your quilt? Because this amazing thing happens when you stand up at show and tell. The people who are drawn to what you just displayed on the show and tell, they come to you and they talk to you. It's like the best thing in the whole world. Then you find your people. That's the thing that I think is just really amazing about the quilting world in general, is you can always find your peeps.
Yeah.
But you have to put yourself up there to go, hey, I made this. And then that all goes back to that whole thing about, you know, get rid of the self-doubt and standing up there and going, I'm proud of this. I'm an artist. I did this.
Right.
And then you start drawing those people that are drawn to what you do. They'll come to you. It's as simple as that.
What's important to you about quilts?
Oh, important to me about quilts. There are aspects of, like I said, the process is the part that's really important to me because I feel I need to do that. I like the fact that these quilts are going to be around longer than I am, and then someday someone's going to go, I wonder why she put orange in that quilt. Like, it doesn't go anywhere else in the quilt. I love that. People are going to be curious. It's a story. It embraces, I think, a lot of women's history. I love that aspect. I love that I can make a quilt for my own joyful purposes, but also if I was giving a quilt to somebody who's having a hard time, or there was a tragedy, or they're ill, or whatever reason it is, that I'm still giving joy to that person by making a quilt. And I think that's about the most powerful thing about the quilting world, is that I can just give a quilt and it's a hug to somebody else, and that just makes it really wonderful.
Well, that's great. I want to thank you so much for taking this time. You have been a longtime friend and supporter of the Quilt Alliance, and it's just a thrill to have you as our first StoryBee guest. And I love this quilt behind you so much. I hope you'll be putting up pictures when you finish with it so we all can see it.
Absolutely. Yep. I think the customer, she just saw it for the first time yesterday. I usually don't show people the quilts when they're in progress for a commission. So she got her first sneak yesterday because she'll be having this quilt probably within about a month. It's going to be finished, and she gets to enjoy it and finish the joy that I started.
And was she excited when she saw it? Oh, I hope so.
Over the top happy.
I hope so. It's fabulous. Well, thank you so much. It's been really fun talking to you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.